A dire warning about the state of our planet. Our oceans are hotter than they've ever been, and that spells trouble for us all, with more floods, droughts and fiercer storms, as well as a greater loss of marine life. The alarm bells are ringing, but why aren't the biggest polluters listening? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine Dennis. Now, we're becoming quite used to getting bad news on climate change. The latest warning, our oceans are warming and they're warming fast. Sea temperatures last year were the highest on record. They've been going up every year for the past decade. The sea absorbs more than 90% of the warming gases that come from burning fossil fuels. Scientists say the extra heat produced is equal to every one of us running 100 microwave ovens all day. Warmer seas mean more intense storms, droughts, floods and wildfires like those burning in Australia right now. Well, despite all of these alarms about the climate crisis, we're releasing more greenhouse gases than ever. The UN's Weather Agency last year recorded the highest level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. All right, let's introduce our panel now. We have Anto Mohsin in Doha. He's an assistant professor of Northwestern University here in Qatar, who researches energy and the environment. In Hamburg, in Germany, we have Heike Vesper. She's director of marine programs at the World Wildlife Fund. And in London, we have Cornelia Meyer, who's an energy economist and CEO of Meyer Resources. Welcome to you all. First, let me come to you, though, Heike, because the temperature of the oceans is, as I understand it, a much more accurate measure of the climate crisis that we're going through at the moment.
Yes, that's because the surface of the ocean catches most of the heat, which is trapped by the increased greenhouse gases. And this has a heavy influence on the global weather and climate patterns.
And could there be any other explanation for these rising temperatures in our oceans other than human activity and the release of greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, we have, or what we observed in the past is that we have regular upcoming warming events in the ocean, which is called El Niño, and I'm pretty sure that most of the people have heard about that. But the frequency or the increase in temperature, which are measured right now, and which the data which were published, are indicating that this changed a lot. And this is really related to the increase in greenhouse gas emissions, and it's man-made.
Right. And now we've already mentioned some of the calamities that are likely to befall us, i.e. severe weather patterns and a disruption to the established seasons and whatnot. Is there anything good that can result from warmer ocean temperatures?
Well, I need to think about that one.
Okay.
If there can be some good in it. No. Well, what we know is that what we will face is a shift in patterns, for example, for fish stocks. So they might change their migration routes. So we will have guests in the North Sea from warmer water, like tuna, for example. But if this is good for economy or people, that's what I would doubt, because this fish is coming from somewhere and it will be missed in that areas.
Right. Coming to you now, Anto, here in Doha. Now, you're from Indonesia. You research these matters. Indonesia is a country, as we know, at the start of the year was afflicted by terrible flooding, wasn't it? And yet, Indonesia is still cited by some scientists as being perhaps the 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gases, maybe the 11th, but it's still a heavy emitter of greenhouse gases, largely as a result of a shift in land use, as I believe.
Yes, that's true. Indonesia received a lot amount of rain on the first day of this new year, and the capital city, Jakarta, was flooded as a result of that. But that's not just because of climate change. There are a number of other factors that contributed to the flooding. But the statistics that you mentioned, Indonesia being one of the top largest emitters of carbon dioxide, come not only from factories, cars, and other carbon dioxide, typical carbon dioxide emitters of the country. Indonesia has been losing a lot of its forests. Forests, as oceans act as carbon sinks.
Well, sorry, Anto, they're not losing them, they're being cut down, right?
Correct, yes. They're being cut down, they're being shifted and made into palm oil plantations in many places in the country.
Right, and yet Indonesian official policy is a voluntary reduction to reduce its emissions by 26% by this year, 2020. How's it doing on that? How much progress is it making on that target?
Well, that number, I think, was an earlier commitment. In 2015, the country revised its commitment. It will try to reduce carbon emission by 29% by 2030 on its own, and 41% using international collaborations. I mean, if we look at the entire country, as far as efforts to reduce that climate change, there needs to be more efforts. I mean, there have been some concrete results that happen on the ground, and for that I mean, for example, in Jakarta, in an effort to reduce car being used, there's a public transportation. But again, a lot of Indonesia's forests have been cut down for timber and palm oil plantation. That still needs to be addressed.
Right. And coming to you, Cornelia, in London, it's amazing to many people around the world, the fact that we've identified these calamities that are befalling so many different parts of the world. Many of those calamities are being attributed to the climate crisis, and yet our emissions are going up. They were recorded last year as being at its highest ever, and the biggest culprits are those most developed nations. Why is that?
Well, it's not just those most developed nations, and China is also a big culprit, as is India. And I would say, if you have a global problem, and nothing is a more global problem than climate, you need global solutions. So the United Nations Framework Conference on Climate Change, UNFCCC, which holds the COP conferences, is really would be a good mechanism. But what happened is we saw that in 2018, Donald Trump said he would be leaving the Paris Agreement, the Paris Accord on climate change, which came from COP21. And we saw now with the latest COP in Madrid that without the largest economy on board, it was really hard to come to conclusions. And this global problem needs a global solution. And one of the things that's really, really important is that we have a global price for carbon, for carbon trading,
right.
Because nothing works, especially with industry, better than if you give them the financial incentives to do better.
But wasn't Paris, Cornelia, wasn't Paris meant to be the start of a global solution? There was so much jubilation, wasn't there, at the time in 2015? You'll remember it well. That was supposed to be at the start of something really significant.
Yeah, it was the start of something really significant. And again, it took the US, it took the Obama administration who really, really, sort of cajoled people together to get there. Once you have the biggest economy out, it is really, really hard to find other economy, to find that consensus. What you see now, though, is that on the investment side, you see more and more the sort of the ESG, the environmental and governance investment stream is the fastest growing investment stream. You also see insurance companies, especially reinsurers, saying, "Okay, we will not support certain things anymore, like coal." Both
right.
Munich Re and Swiss Re have said we won't do that anymore, and that's a double whammy because they have huge investment portfolios. Plus, once you can't insure something anymore, it's getting much harder to be active in that field.
Right, Heike, can you see a solution to the problem, as Cornelia points out, China is actually officially the biggest emitter. Most of that, something like 75% of those emissions coming from coal, the burning of coal. Can you understand China's argument? China's saying there's a global economic slowdown. It needs to stimulate its economy, so it needs to go full steam ahead no matter what. That is the main objective for the Chinese, is really to get their economy going again. Therefore, they're burning more coal.
Well, see, I'm coming from an ocean's perspective on the issue. And if you look on what climate change and warming of oceans mean to ocean ecosystems, so it's hard to understand why politicians don't act as fast and as rapid as is necessary. All coastal habitats like mangrove forests, seagrass beds, coral reefs, so they will be harmed by under any emission scenario which we have, if it is 1.5 degrees increase or 2% increase. So, and even for all coral reefs, let me have a further or a closer look on that one. So the prediction is that with an increase of 1.5 degree, all coral reefs will be under threat, and we might lose 70 to 90% of all coral reefs. But under a scenario of 2-degree increase, we will lose 99%. And that's something so we shouldn't put on risk.
Right. Coming to you, Anto, as Cornelia pointed out, China is the biggest emitter. But do you understand the perspective coming from developing economies? Their contention is that you in the West, the more developed economies, you've had your time, you've done your polluting, give us a chance to catch up. And they're not terribly pleased with the Green Fund. The richer countries are supposed to be contributing to this fund in order to allow the developing countries to make appropriate adaptations in order to fulfil their commitments under the Paris Accord. So there's a lot of angst, if you like, isn't there, with regard to the application of Paris?
Well, I do understand the perspective that you mentioned, which is why I think the more developed economies and the richer countries, the richer economies should do more. But China, you mentioned China, there's been a lot of movement and progress in China itself. I don't know if you noticed, in generating electricity using more renewable energy sources, solar panels, for example. The Chinese have been receiving or experiencing the impact of climate change, in particular air pollutions in many of their cities, and they want to have cleaner air. So they've been doing something about that.
Yeah, but they've still given approvals to 5 times the number of coal mines for the first half of this year. And as you point out, air pollution is a massive problem. Cornelia, let me come to you and let's talk a little bit about Norway, because in many ways Norway is, it epitomises, doesn't it, this awkward contradiction that many of the richer countries has. It's one of the richest countries in the world, of course, got the biggest, I think, sovereign wealth fund, which comes from oil and gas, doesn't it? And yet it's a great green innovator.
Yeah, it's a great green innovator, and it's the sovereign wealth fund is no longer allowed to invest in oil and gas, but that's also for reasons of diversification. And you see a lot of the European countries. You saw the UK coming out saying we want to be CO2 emissions neutral by 2050. You saw Austria coming out, and we wanting to get there by 2040, and we see the Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen's new Green Deal, where she wants to have Europe as the first emissions neutral continent by 2050. That's all nice, but really, again, it's a global problem. It needs a global solution. And when you come to China again, our colleague from Indonesia is absolutely right. I mean, you know, they are really, in terms of research for renewables, they're doing very well. But you can see that they have, as the economy was slowing, they have sort of put less money into more expensive sources of energy and gone back to coal. That drives the wrong behaviors. All in all, I think what we really need to do, a piece of work that needs to be undertaken globally, is we need to look at all the sources of energy for the whole life cycle, from producing them to decommissioning them, and say what is really the environmental impact. Only once we've done this piece of work do we really know. Can the policymakers really make the right
Really? Have we,
decisions?
Cornelia, have we not passed that stage? Have we not established the damage, the amount of damage that is being done and is to come in the future if we continue at these existing emission levels? Have we not established that?
Absolutely, absolutely, we have done that. But we also need to look. What we have not done is looked at with the various sources of energy what decommissioning is. Decommissioning of solar panels, decommissioning of. We really need to look at it in order to find the right energy mix. We need to do something, but we need to do it in an educated way. And I think policymakers tend to sort of rush into one thing and then find out it was the wrong thing. So we really need to do that. And absolutely, we need to do something, and we need to use the existing multilateral frameworks like the UNFCCC and the COP mechanism to get that done. And in that sense, we do need the United States back in the fold.
Right. Heike, coming to you, I started off the programme by mentioning the fact that we get a plethora of climate warnings, don't we, on a regular basis. Is there a danger, do you think, among the general population of a kind of information overload and people becoming slightly inured, if you like, to the dangers of the climate crisis? I mean, do you think that's a possibility?
I'm not sure about that. Honestly, I would say so. We can't over talk about the effects of climate change on oceans and on people in general. See, the poles are melting, the glaciers are melting, so the sea level rises, flood, storms increase. On the other hand, droughts and wildfires increase, so people are directly impacted by climate change. So it's not that we talk any longer about something that might happen with the next or after the next generation is coming. So the predictions are for 2050 already that millions of people will be impacted by the sea level rise. Fish stocks are shifting, so people lose income and food. So we lose enormous important habitats to protect our coastlines. So do we really think that all those people will stay in the regions facing such horror scenarios for their lives? So it will be coming worse. So if we don't act, and what we urgently need to do is to cut down emissions.
Right. Anto, coming from Indonesia, you'll really relate to that, won't you? Because, I mean, Jakarta is sinking, we understand. And in fact, there's to be a new capital for Indonesia. Do Indonesian people, on the whole, do they accept the issue of the climate crisis, or do they attribute some of these extreme weather events that they've had to endure? Do they attribute those to other things, to any any other kinds of causes or factors?
They attribute it to other causes as well. One of them is the poor water management infrastructure in the city. But on average, they're aware of climate change, I think, just like many people in the world today. But what I have found from my experience teaching, I'm a professor, so I teach these issues in my classes. Even though an average person, an average student is aware of this biggest issue that we are facing right now, many don't necessarily know in details some of the impacts that we're already experiencing. For example, island nations in the Pacific, for example, seeing sea level rise, or for that matter, they feel that they could not do anything on the individual level to help address this issue. So I agree with Cornelia that this is a global issue and it's a global solution, but we cannot, I think, just rely on multilateral international solutions. I think regionally, blocs such as the European Union, ASEAN in Southeast Asia, well, we have GCC here, but that's not quite functioning right now, unfortunately. Need to also address this issue, also at the national level, communal level, and individual level. And many think that, as an individual, we can't really do much, but I would disagree with that. To give
Anto, give me an example then of how you live, how it's changed your habits and your family.
Yeah, well, for example, I mean, I've been trying to use more of public transportations in cities I've lived in the past. I've lived in New York City, I've lived in Singapore. They have great public transportation system instead of using cars, for example. Here in Doha, the Doha Metro is just open. I'm learning of the 3 lines that we have. That's one. I teach this issue in my classes to make more students aware of this issue. And I keep being updated with the news and proposed solutions of this climate change. One that I would like to mention, for example.
All right, but make it quick, please, Anto. We're running out of time.
Sure. It's an article by Bill McKibben. He's a climate activist, author, and co-founder of the 350.org movement. He recently wrote an article at the New Yorker saying basically that, maybe individually we can choose which banks we want to bank with, because some banks are underwriting big coal companies.
We get the idea. Thanks for that. And Heike, how does this whole crisis impact you and your family as individuals? I mean, how does it shape your lives?
Well, I do have children, and one is a teenager, so she's very much engaged in Fridays for Future, for example, and being an environmentalist all my working life. So I thought that I already try to do a lot, but she's challenging us every day, and this is really good to see. So we changed, for example, how we eat. So like meat and milk products, so that's a decreasing part of our nutrition. So you can do, every individual has to change its behavior. So we all have to contribute, even if the solution lies on the global level. But if we don't start ourselves, how do we think, how long should we wait until politicians act?
Right. And last word to you, Cornelia. I won't ask you if you've given up meat, but I will ask you whether it is within our lifetime that we will see an end or a significant reduction of our reliance upon fossil fuels. Do you think 2050, 2060?
I think we will not see an end to fossil fuels. Oil demand is still growing by, according to the IEA, 1.2 million barrels a day, and it's going to go on. But I think we will see these fuels being more efficiently used. We will try to reduce them wherever we can. And public transport is good. It's getting away from that consumerism. When you look at our forefathers, they didn't eat as much meat as we are eating. They didn't buy as many clothes. Fast fashion, by the way. Fast fashion, the H&Ms, the Zaras emit just as much CO2 as all air travel combined. So, we need to sort of look at our consumption patterns throughout the board. That's right, because otherwise, this is also, climate change is also a security risk. When the report says 150 million people will lose their homes by 2050. I think it will be more. If you have these refugee streams, those are security risks.
Yeah.
I think we would be well advised to look at how we live our lives.
All right, perfect note on which to end. Thank you very much indeed. Anto Mohsin in Doha, Heike Vesper in Hamburg, and Cornelia Meyer in London. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
And as ever, thank you for watching the programme. If you would like to see it again, you can go to the website aljazeera.com. If you want some more discussion, as I suspect you might, there's our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And there's a Twitter sphere. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'm @Martine Dennis. From me and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.